Delve into the biblical timeline of history. We aim to uncover the significance of important historical dates, such as the creation in 11,013 BC, the flood in 4990 BC, and even the date when God would bring judgment upon the house of God, the churches, as mentioned in 1 Peter 4:17. We'll also explore the date of Judgment Day, which is also alluded to in the same verse. And you might be wondering what the biblical timeline of history is and why it's important to learn. These dates weren't placed in the Bible arbitrarily. They serve a purpose beyond mere knowledge. God always has a reason for concealing truths within the Bible. These essential dates are not explicitly stated in verses, but require meticulous exploration through comparing Scripture with Scripture, the biblical method for revealing truth, mathematical analysis, and ultimately guidance from God's Holy Spirit. So what exactly is the biblical timeline of history? It's a timeline that spans across the Bible, beginning with the first book, Genesis. This timeline then extends into subsequent books and chapters. Why should we invest time in learning about the biblical timeline of history? The answer can be found in Ecclesiastes 8:5. Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. To comprehend the current time or season, understanding past biblical events is essential to understand when future events will occur that the Bible is prophesied about.
Kari, you're still muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, there you go. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Biblical Timeline of History series. I know it's been about 3 months since we last did our last episode, so this is part 5, and we're just going to go ahead and get started. All right. Brian, can you just confirm that you can see my screen?
Yeah, if you could make it a little bigger though.
Okay. How's that?
I guess yeah, that'll do.
Does it look small on your screen?
Yeah, yeah, but I can still read it, so
Okay. Yeah, I can zoom in. So I just wanted to give a quick update on the timeline page. Some people are having issues with it. I just want to remind people that it's still a work in progress. So, oops. We had people actually in the waiting room, so I think we'll go ahead and we'll just give the intro again. Give me 1 second. All right, we'll just start over. All right, welcome back, everyone, to another timeline video series going through the biblical timeline of history. I'm here with Brian, and we're going to just pick up from where we left off. If you haven't watched any of our videos yet, you can go onto the YouTube page that we have on eBible's YouTube page, or you can go to the Roku channel, and you're going to see parts 1 through 4, I believe. So this is part 5, episode 5, and we'll just get started. All right. I just wanted to let people know that we made some changes to the timeline page. Some people are having issues with the page itself, like how to navigate the timeline. So I put this this little instructions box that should help. So give me 1 second. All right, so the first part says to on how to use the timeline. If you want to scroll along the timeline, you can use these arrow keys if you're on a computer. What I was doing is I have a laptop that has a trackpad, so that allows me to scroll left and right which is pretty easy for me, but for other people, they don't have that. So you can just use these keys right here, left and right. But before you do that, you have to click on one of these timeline patriarchs, and then you can use the right key to just scroll like that. And then if you do have a trackpad, you just swipe left or right, and that should help with that. And yeah, that covers that. I just put one last thing. If you're new to this page and you want to learn about the different patriarchs and how we arrive at this information, you just go underneath each of the patriarchs and you would click these numbers underneath each one, and that will give you the information you're looking for. Looks like we're getting some background noise, Brian.
Yeah, hold on one second.
All right. So we'll just go ahead and get started. Let's go down the timeline. So I'll just do like a quick recap of where we left off. So we last went through, we got as far as Aaron and Moses. So Amram was the last one, and I think we went over Moses and his lifespan. So we're just going to go ahead and pick up from Moses, actually from Aaron, because Aaron is the final patriarch. All right. Well, I'll just go ahead and read because or actually, do you want to go through Moses, Brian?
We can do that if you want to click on it.
Sure.
So Moses' life can be broken up into three 40-year periods. The first 40 years is when Moses was raised in Egypt. And in Acts 7:22, we read, "And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was a full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would have delivered them, but they understood not." And of course, we know that after he killed the Egyptian, he had to flee from the face of Pharaoh. So that means, so for the first 40 years, he was raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And now we enter into the second 40-year period of his life where he met his wife and lived with his father-in-law. And if you go to, we know that Moses was 80 years old when the Exodus occurred. Exodus 7:7 reads, "And Moses was fourscore years old, and Aaron was fourscore and 3 years old, and they spake unto Pharaoh." And if you don't know what a score is 20 years. So fourscore, 4 times 20 is 80. Fourscore and 3 is 83. Aaron, of course, we all know the famous line from the Gettysburg Address, 4 score and 7 years ago. So 4 score, 4 times 20 is 80. So that would have been 87 years ago, if you wanted to tie it into something that, we might have heard in secular life. But a score is 20 years. And so if he was 40 when he killed the Egyptian and he was 80 when he came back, that means that there was a 40-year period that he was living in the wilderness with his wife and his father-in-law and whatnot. And I guess that's it for that.
Yeah, and the dates are listed right here as far as
Oh,
the
yeah.
date and
So
yeah.
Moses was born in the year 9486 AC, or excuse me, EA being Earth Age. So 9486 EA, which roughly corresponds to 1527 BC. 40 years later, when he would have killed the Egyptian and fled into the wilderness, would have been the year 9526 EA, which corresponds to 1487 BC. And then finally, 40 years after that would be the year 9566 EA, when the Exodus took place, which would have been 1447 BC.
Right. And this is the final 40-year period.
And Moses was in the wilderness 40 years along with the Israelites. In Deuteronomy 34:7, we read, "And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his force abated." So obviously, if he was 40 when he killed the Egyptian, and then 40 years later when he was 80 was the Exodus, and then finally at the age of 120. He died just before the crossing of Jordan and the fall of Jericho.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out you missed the word natural. It says nor his natural force abated.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah. And then this would be the Exodus, what's in red. So that's the year that they left Egypt. The date would be 1447 BC. This is when Aaron was 83 and Moses was 80. You can see it lines up with the 80th year of his life right there. Can come right down. That's the Exodus. And the year was 9566 as far as Earth years. So if you start from creation, year one, and then come down here, we're almost 10,000 years into Earth's history.
Actually, it would start with year zero.
Yeah.
And then, for example, Adam died. Well, Seth was born in the year 130. 130 years later, Adam died the year 930. Flood was 6023. The Holy Spirit left the churches in the year 13,000. Judgment Day 13,023, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I guess whether you count inclusive or your actual, but all right. So here's Aaron.
Oh, and Aaron is 83 years old at the time of the Exodus. Even though his total lifespan is 123 years, his patriarchy ends at the age of 83. And again, Exodus 7:7, Moses was fourscore years old, and Aaron was fourscore and 3 years old when they spake unto Moses. And what comes next? Well, Aaron is the last timeline patriarch. So how do we continue to progress along the timeline? Well, going through historical events, the king's lines, and more. We must now use other means to continue the timeline instead of the patriarch's lifespans. Kerosem is proof,
No,
as
Kerosene.
Kerosem proof is no longer needed from here on out for timeline purposes, since there are going to be since we are no longer going through timeline patriarchs. And just to give a little historical context, we know, for example, Adam was 130 when Seth was born, and even though he was physically alive, he was no longer patriarch. So too, when Seth was born when Enos was born when Seth was 105, Seth was still alive but no longer timeline patriarch. If you go forward to Moses, you can go one of two ways. You could say that Moses was 504 when Shem was born, at which point he was no longer timeline patriarch, or you could say he was timeline patriarch until the flood when he was 600 years old. But either way, there's a period where he was still alive but no longer patriarch. And then, of course, going forward, we know that Terah was a timeline patriarch for the first 130 years of his life until Abraham was born, but he didn't die till the age of 205. Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born, but he didn't die for another 75 years. Rebecca gave birth to Jacob and Esau when Isaac was 60, but he lived to another 120 years to 180. So we do have precedent where timeline patriarchs are still alive, but no longer timeline patriarch. The difference between this and all the others is not only does Aaron's time as patriarchy as an individual end, but the entire patriarchy system is no longer being used. And we actually figured it out. That gets us about 73% of the way through the timeline.
But yeah,
Bring that up again.
it helps to see it this way. So if you take Isaac's born right here on this line, and you go 60 years into his life, well, his patriarchy ends at the 60-year mark, and that's when Jacob would take over. The same thing. Jacob, for 70 years of his life, he's patriarch, and then he's no longer patriarch, and it's passed to Levi. So that's what he means is that they overlap each other, as you can see on the timeline. Whereas before, some of these don't. So they don't overlap here, right? With Eber and Peleg, they just continue right after the year that Eber dies, Peleg takes over. So it's a little different in this circumstance. But over here, you see them overlapping. So the idea with Aaron is that his patriarchy ends And Brian will go through this right now. So let me just go back here.
Um, Yeah, so you take notice that the time that Aaron is time of the Exodus when Aaron is 83, we're almost 10,000 years into Earth's history, or to be exact, we're in the year 9566 years, and this was arrived at by going through the timeline patriarchs. Now the remaining 3479 years, which takes us to the year 2033, now have to be figured out through other means. And Aaron died at the age of 123.
No, actually, yeah,
I'm
that's
sorry, yeah, Aaron dies at the age of 123, but he stops being patriarch at the year when he's 83 years old.
right.
Um,
I did want to just mention this progress bar, why we have it here. The reason why we have this is just to show that, we're about 73% through the timeline. So it shows that most of the timeline was going through patriarchs. And Aaron would be the final patriarch that we're going through. And then, like Brian just read, now we have to use other means, historical periods of time to continue.
and the way we arrived at that 73% is that the Exodus took place in the year 9566 EA. The year 2033 is roughly corresponding to the year 13,045. So if you take 9,566 and you divide it by 13,045, you'll find it's 73.33%. So that's why we say it's about 73%. So almost three-quarters of the timeline of Earth's history we can go through the timeline patriarchs.
All right. Yeah, I guess I'll read this part. So it's something that that was kind of curious. I mean, I guess as we get to Aaron, you'll find that if you've been using these math tables to add up all these numbers, there's only been about there's 26 numbers here just to get to Aaron. So this is 130 is when we start with Adam to when Seth is born, and then when you get to Aaron at the age of 83, it's 26 numbers that we've had to add up so far to get this far into the timeline. So it's not too many numbers, but the difficult task obviously is making sure that it's accurate, and it did require a lot of comparing scripture to scripture on Mr. Camping's part to discover these numbers. But once they were discovered, it's just a matter of adding them all up, and you can see how we're keeping track this whole way through until we arrive at the year 9566.
And of course, it also required an understanding of the Kara Shem doctrine.
Right. Yeah, and that's basically we're now at the point in the timeline where we're no longer using that because in the case of like Kohath, Amram, and Aaron, they were born, when Kohath died, Amram took over. But now that we're done with the patriarchs, we're no longer using the Kerasem. So now we're just gonna, move on to the next part of the timeline, which after the Exodus, so Brian, did you want to explain with Aaron why we don't pick up at the end of his life? Why we go from his 83rd year?
Well,
And
everything else, like for example, somebody would have a son born. So, for example, Seth was born when Adam was 130, and then the timeline patriarch would go through him, where the phrase Kerashem was used, or where it wasn't used, when one timeline patriarch died, that would be the year that the next timeline patriarch was born. Now, we do know that, for example, Aaron and Moses both had sons, but we don't know anything about the lifespans of those sons. We don't have numbers. And so there's no way to go forward after that. Whereas if you read Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, we have a clear chronology where either one was the phrase Kerashem was used, they were born the year that they were begotten, or in the case where the phrase is not used, they were born the year the previous timeline patriarch died. And there are of course two exceptions from Noah to Shem and from Terah to Abram. And we're not going to go through them. We went through those in the previous studies, but I just want to mention that to say that there are those two exceptions. But here there are no sons to go through. We don't. Aaron had four sons, and I think two of them God killed because they offered strange fire. So they actually died before Aaron, and the two sons that didn't die, we have no idea what their lifespans are. We don't know. Maybe the Bible does give their children, but even if it does, we don't know when they were born or how long they lived. So at that point, it becomes impossible to track the timeline through the descendants of Moses or Aaron.
So then the question that I'm sure the viewers are watching is, where do we go from Aaron's age of 83? How do we continue?
Well, we have two ways we can go. When we had a time bridge for the Exodus, we know that there was 430 years from the entering of Egypt to the Exodus, or you could go through uh, Levi to Kohath to Amram to Aaron. So too, we have another time bridge, and we can read about that in, let me see my notes. First.
Actually, if you want, I could just pull up the 480 year tab.
Yeah.
If I can help.
Yeah, I should have. Oh, it's First Kings 6:1.
Yeah, it's right here. I have it on
Okay.
the tab. You
All
can
right,
just
I'll read that. So we learn from the Bible that there's a 480-year period from the Exodus to when Solomon laid the foundation of the temple. And we read in First Kings 6:1, and it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the fourth year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the second month, that he began to build the house of Jehovah. And since we learned that Aaron is the last timeline patriarch and he lived at the time of the Exodus, we go from when Aaron is 83 and we add 480 years, which would be in the year 1447 BC or the year 9566 EA, Earth Age, and we add 480 years, which will take us to 10,046 Earth Age or 967 BC. And again, you can see the math there.
Yep. So that's a quite of a big jump, going from 83 and then 480 gets us all the way to when Solomon laid the foundation of the temple, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, and then if Brian, I don't so that's basically as far as we've gotten on the timeline. But I think Brian, we have this other period of time that he's going to go through with the 360-year period.
Yes. So
Like
we
the
can
desert
break
period.
the 480-year period into various subsets. So it's broken up into 40 years in the wilderness, and there was a 360-year judges period. And then we had 40 years reign of Saul and 40 years reign of David. And at which point you might be asking, well, it says that it was in Solomon's fourth year, so we have to add 4 years for Solomon. And the answer is no, we don't. And the reason is because those 4 years of Solomon reign were a co-regency between David and Solomon. And so as a result, the laying of the temple was shortly after David's death, and the first 4 years of Solomon coincide with the last 4 years of David. And so we just go to David's death, which was Solomon's fourth year. So to prove this, we can go to Numbers 13, and let's read verses 1 to 3, if you can pull that up. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. And Moses, by the commandment of Jehovah, sent them from the wilderness of Paran, all whose men were heads of the children of Israel. And if we skip down to verse 25, and they returned from searching the land after 40 days. And if we could now go to Numbers 14:34. After the number of days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, a day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. So the Exodus occurred in the year 9566, 1407 BC. 40 years later would be 9606 or
I think you said, did you
1407.
say, did you say 1407 or 1447 for the Exodus?
The Exodus was 1447. 40 years
Okay.
later would have been 1407, or using the biblical calendar, 9566 goes to 9606.
Okay.
Okay. And we know that there was a 360-year judges period. Now, it gets a little more complicated here, because if you go through all the timeline references in Judges and First Samuel, it actually adds up to 471 years rather than 360. But what Mr. Camping discovered is that it broke down into two categories. There was one category where it talked about the chronology of Israel, and there was another chronology where it talks about oppressed by a heathen power. And when you separate those two out, uh, the chronology of Israel adds up to 360 years, and the oppression of the heathen power adds up to 111 years. And of course, those 111 years would have occurred during those 360 years, but they would have been concurrent with it. So we don't add those numbers in to get to the 360. And if you want, can I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
Can you see that?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. So I have everything laid out here. So here I have a line for each of the chronologies. The ones in the pink, these are when they were oppressed, but so this is the total. This is when they were oppressed by a heathen power. And if you add these up, they add up to 111, which breaks down to 3 times 37. These are the chronologies of Israel. And if you add these up, these add up to 360, which breaks down to 2 cubed times 3 squared times 5. And 471 breaks down to 3 times 157. Here I have, so this gives each of the chronologies that add up to 360. This tells you what it is cumulatively within the 360. And then over here, I give the starting year and the ending year for each of these periods in the BC way of taking track of time. Here I do it in the AC year. And then over here, I give a breakdown. For example, 1407 is 3 times 7 times 67. Sorry?
No, that was it was some background noise. Yeah.
Okay. And the year 1367 is a prime number. Here, if you go to 9606, that breaks down to 2 times 3 times 1601, and it ends in 9646, which is 2 times 7 times 13 times 53. Obviously, there's a lot of numbers that we don't know the meanings to, but they are there nevertheless. So reading through them, if we go to Judges 3:8, and it says, therefore, the anger of Jehovah was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Kirshathacham, king of Mesopotamia, and the children of Israel served Kirshathacham 8 years. So this is oppression by a heathen power, so that isn't counted towards the 360 years. And if we go to Judges 3:11, we read, and the land had rest 40 years, and Othaniel, the son of Kenaz, died. And if you go to Judges 3:14, it says, so the children of Eglon served the king of Moab 18 years. And this again is oppressed by a heathen power, so it doesn't count towards the 360. In Judges 3:30, we read, so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years, and 80 would be 80. And we can see that there. In Judges chapter 4, we read verses 2 and 3. It's not coming up for some reason on mine. Can you read that, Carl?
Sure. Judges 4, 2 through 3.
Yeah.
Give me a second. All right. And Jehovah sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. Harosheth. Verse 3.
Yeah.
And the children of Israel cried unto Jehovah, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel.
Okay. So here you see this 20 years, but it's oppressed by a heathen power, so it doesn't count towards the 360. In Judges 5:31, for some reason that's not coming up either. Can you read that one too? Judges 5:31.
Yep. All right, Judges 5:31. So let all thine enemies perish, O Jehovah, but let them that love him be as the sun when he goeth forth in his might. And the land had rest 40 years.
Okay, so this 40 years right here counts towards the 360. And in Judges 6:1, we read, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of Jehovah, and Jehovah delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. So this is oppression by a heathen power, and not part of the 360. In Judges 8:28, we read, thus Midian was subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. And this is not oppressed by a heathen power, so this counts. In Judges 9:22, we read, when Abimelech had reigned 3 years over Israel, and this is not an oppression, so this 3 years counts towards the 360. If we read Judges 10, verses 1 and 2, and after Abimelech there rose to defend Israel Tola of Puah, the son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he dwelt in Shamir in Mount Ephraim, and he judged Israel 23 years and died and was buried in Shamir. And again, this is not oppression, but part of the 360. In Judges 10:3, we read, and after him rose Jair, a Gideonite, and judged Israel 22 years. And again, this is not oppression by a heathen power. So this is part of what we add up to get to the 360. In Judges chapter 10, we read verses 7 and 8. And the anger of Jehovah was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the children of Ammon. And that year he vexed and oppressed the children of Israel 18 years, and all the children of Israel that were on the other side of Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is Gilead. So here we see oppressed for 18 years. So this did occur during that 360 years, but we don't add up this 18 years to get to the 360. If we read in Judges 12:7, and Japheth judged Israel 6 years. Then Japheth died, the Gileadite, and was buried in one of the cities of Gilead. And this we do add up to get to the 360. In Judges 12:9, we read, Judges 12, verses 8 and 9. And after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel, and he had 30 sons and 30 daughters, whom he sent abroad, and took 30 daughters from abroad for his sons, and he judged Israel 7 years. So this 7 years we add in to get the 360. And we read in Judges 12:11, and after him, Elon, a Zebulunite, judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. And we add this 10 years as part of the 360. And if we read Judges chapter 12, we'll read verses 13 and 14. And after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, a Parathazonite, judged Israel, and he had 40 sons and 30 nephews that rode on 10 asses and on 10 ass colts, and he judged Israel 8 years. So we take this 8 years and we add it. And then in Judges 13:1 we read, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of Jehovah, and Jehovah delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. And this is judgment by a heathen power, which again would have occurred during those 360 years, but we don't add this up with the other numbers to get to the 360. And then in Judges 15:20, we read, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. And in 1 Samuel 4:18, we read, and it came to pass when he made mention of the ark of God that he fell from off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died, for he was an old man and heavy, and he judged Israel 40 years. So this was Eli. And then in 1 Samuel 6:1, we read, and the ark of Jehovah was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And 7 months is less than a year, but we're going to round this up to a year. And then finally in 1 Samuel 7:2, we read, and it came to pass while the ark abode in Kirjatharim that the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after Jehovah. And so here again, you can see all the numbers and how we get the 360 and the 11. And so the tan years, these tan rows are when they were oppressed, and these green years are where they weren't. Well, not where it talks about the chronology of Israel. And so that's how we get the 360 years in the Judges period. And then, of course, at the end of the Judges period, we know that Samuel anointed Saul king, and he became the first king of Israel. And let's see. If we read Acts 13:21, can you bring that up?
Yeah, give me a second. That's Acts 13.
13:21.
All right.
And afterward they desired a king, and God gave unto them Saul the son of Cis, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, by the space of 40 years. So here we can see that Saul was king for 40 years. And if we could look at 2 Samuel 5, verses 4 and 5. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron reigned he over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem reigned he 30 and 3 years over Israel and Judah. And if we could go to 1 Kings 2:11. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 30 and 3 years reigned he in Jerusalem. Now, in the other passage, it said he reigned in Hebron 7 years and 6 months. I do not have a good explanation for why that is. It may have been rounding. It may have been ascension years versus non-ascension years, calendar versus actual years. I'm not sure about that. I haven't researched that in detail. But the point is, either way, he reigned for a grand total of 40 years, which is what we need for purposes of this study. And just for completeness, can we look at 1 Kings 11:42?
Yep.
And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And 2 Chronicles 9:30. And Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. So here we see that Solomon reigned for a total of 40 years. And that isn't really necessary since, like I said, the first 4 years of Solomon's reign coincided with the last 4 years of David's reign, but I just wanted to put that in there just for completeness.
So if anyone's wondering, I'll just show on the timeline real fast. So that whole Judges period that Brian just went through, we'll pick up again, probably in another episode to explain it, maybe in more detail as well. But it's basically he just read through each of these periods, and on the timeline you can see it says the land had rest for 40 years, and that's what this period is. And then this 80-year period, and so on and so forth. And that basically fills up the whole 360-year period, which is right here. And this first 40-year period, this was the wilderness sojourn. So again, this timeline is all it's part of this 480-year period. We're just kind of breaking. So we know, I mean, the Bible says there was a 480-year period from the Exodus until when Solomon began to build the temple. So we're just kind of breaking it down further as the Bible gives us that information. And so it breaks down into the 40-year period in the wilderness. There's a 360-year period. There's another 40-year period. That's the reign of Saul, right, Brian?
Yes, 40 years of Saul and 40
And
years of
then
David.
40 years of David. And that's when that 480-year period ends, because when David dies, Solomon reigns. But you did mention the co-regency, which we're going to go in more depth. Once we get past the judges period, we're going to get into the kings, and we're going to explain the co-regencies between each of these kings.
Yeah. So I have a good amount of material to prove that there was no co-regency between David and Saul, and there was between David and Solomon. We got about 15 minutes left.
Yeah, I was wondering, somebody had a question, so maybe we
Okay.
could open up the room for questions, and then if there's more time, then you could go over. So if anyone has any questions about like the information we just went over or anything on the timeline, if you could raise your hand. Um, somebody posted a question in the chat, so I'll just read it for you, Brian. They asked, where does that time added in our, I don't know if I quite fully understand his question, but where is the credence verse for this? I
Where's
think
the what?
I think he was referring to the judges part that we were talking about. We'll skip it because I don't fully understand what he was asking.
Well, the way, if you read Adam Wen, the way that Mr. Camping came up with this 360 years, he might be asking why we take out the part where they were oppressed by a heathen power and don't count it as part of the 360 years. The way that Mr. Camping did it is he said we had to end up with a grand total of 480 years from the Exodus until Solomon laid the foundation. So Mr. Camping discovered that there was a 4-year co-regency between David and Solomon. So it would have happened shortly after the death of David. So if you take the 40 years of David and you add the 40 years of Saul, and then you add the 40 years that they were in the wilderness, that adds up to 120 years, which means that by default, the judges period had to be 360 years. And so Mr. Camping looked at this and he said it adds up to 471. So he said, well, we have to figure out a way for this to harmonize to add up to 360. And what Mr. Camping came up with was he separated the oppressed by heathen power time references, and he separated from the Israel chronologies. And he found that the Israel chronologies added up to the 360. And if you add up the oppressed by a heathen power, it adds up to a 111. So obviously, it would not correspond to the whole 360 years, but that 111 years was concurrent during that 360 years. We just don't add those time frames to get up to the 360. It's sort of
Yeah.
similar to the way that Mr. Camping looked at the Exodus as a total of 430 years. He said 83 years for Aaron, 137 for Amram, 133 for Kohath. And he said, therefore, Levi must have spent 77 years, and he died at age 177. So Levi must have entered at the age of 60. And then after he figured out that through the back door, then he went to look and see if there was biblical evidence to support that. And so we have a similar situation here.
Yeah, so what he's talking about is if you go from the 83 Aaron, the Exodus, so when Aaron is 83 and you work backwards, go from Amram to Kohath, then the next person's Levi, and that's how he was able to figure out the period from Kohath to how long Levi was in Egypt. So he's talking about that right there. And then just one thing I wanted to point out is that the Bible tells us there was a 480-year period. from the Exodus all the way until when Solomon began to build the temple. So we already know that's true. So these other means are just other ways to locking that in. But we know that, you know, that 480-year period took place. So as we go through this, it's just more information that helps to fit in with this. And it looks like we have a question from Len's laptop, so we'll take that.
Hi. After the death of Eli, when the ark, the Philistines had the ark. I mean, there was some amount of time between his death and when what's his name, Saul began to reign. So how much time was that, and what was going on between that time? Were they under suppression at that time?
They may have been, uh, but
But that
the timeline references where it talks about them being oppressed. We're not adding that into. So those 111 years where they were oppressed were part of the 360. It's simply when we are adding the timeline references to get the 360, we're not including those to get the 360, but it would have been at some point during that 360-year period. Exactly when it occurred, I'm not sure, but it would have occurred during that 360, but we're not adding it in to get the 360.
but
Sort of think of it as a co-regency. They happen simultaneously, just like there was a co-regency between David and Solomon. So we don't add those first 4 years of Solomon because they happened at the same time. So too, those 40 years that they were under the hand of the Philistines, for example, that happened during that 360, but it was concurrent with it. So we don't add that in when getting to the 360.
so so the time frame between when Eli's death and Saul becoming king, it's counted in the 111 years that they were under suppression.
Yeah, well, can we go back to my screen?
Yeah,
Um,
you can just share your screen.
if I can find my mouse. All right, can you guys see the Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah.
So here, there it is. So here we read that Eli judged Israel 40 years. And in 1 Samuel 4:18 it reads, "And it came to pass when he made mention of the ark of God that he fell from off the seat backwards in the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died, for he was an old man and heavy, and he judged Israel 40 years." And although I don't see it here, I believe that was right after he found out that the ark was taken.
Right.
But then in 1 Samuel 6:11, we read, "And the ark of Jehovah was in the country of the Philistines 7 months." So it doesn't give a years, but Mr. Camping rounded it up to a year so that it would add up to 360. And then we know there was a 20-year period after that. And it came to pass while the ark abode in Kirjathrim that the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after Jehovah. So we know that Samuel anointed Saul, and that would have been right at the end of the right at the end of the judges period, and that would begin the reign of King Saul. And so I guess you would say it was 21 years after Eli died
Yeah.
that Samuel anointed Saul, and he became king. And that's when his 40-year period would begin.
So was Samuel considered a judge during that period or no?
I know he was considered judge when he anointed Saul. I don't know specifically that.
So,
Go ahead.
well, I could just share something that Chris shared. I think if you go to let's see, if you go to Acts, let me see if I can find it. Acts. Let me see. Yeah, Acts 13:20. And we're gonna put this into the timeline, but we just didn't have enough time. So in Acts 13:20, and after that he gave unto them judges about the space of 450 years until Samuel the prophet. So there's the Bible's teaching us there's about a 450-year period, right? But it actually adds up to 440, but it does say about. And so I think Chris was teaching that if you begin with Moses, because you remember they said, who made thee a judge and divider over us? And he did judge in the wilderness, right? So if you count from here all the way to Samuel, that gives you 440 years, which is about 450. So Samuel would have been the last judge. That's why it says until Samuel the prophet.
That would be in Exodus 2:14.
Exodus 2:14. Yeah, who made thee a prince and judge over us? So I believe if we take the date of 9526,
Which would have been 40 years before the Exodus. It would have started that 40 years when Moses killed the Egyptian.
right, and then we add 440, that gets us to 9966. 9966, which is right here when King Saul reigns. So Saul was, remember, he was the first king in Israel. So that's 440 years, which would fit in with the Acts being about 450. It says about, so that means it leaves room for it to be 440. And it's actually exactly 440 years if you were to count from Moses's period. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, if you add another 10 years, if you add the full 450, you get to 9976 EA or 1037 BC, which is the year that King David was born.
Yeah, so that would be exactly 450 years. But King Saul was the first king, so I'm not really sure why God says 440 or 450 and not 440. But this is yeah, so that's another topic. Does anyone else have any questions? We have about 7 minutes left before we have to start the Bible reading. If you have a question, if you could just raise your hand. I guess in the meantime, I'll just share what we plan on doing. So after we go through, we'll add more details about this 360-year period. Well, I know Brian has it on the spreadsheet, but we'll try to put it. I'll try to put it on the timeline to make it easy to understand. But after we go through the judges, then we're going to get into the kings, because King Saul is the first king, and we're going to explain the co-regencies and why you just can't count, start from one king and then when he's done ruling, go to the next, because there's a co-regency, so they overlap. Just to give you a quick example of that, if you come over here, you'll see that David and Solomon, they had a co-regency, and you can see their reigns overlap with each other. So you wouldn't count the whole span of this reign. You have to account for the overlapping years. You don't count those in the count. That makes sense. But that's
Yeah. So there was 4 years overlap between David and Solomon. So he laid the temple in the fourth year of his reign, which would have been right after David died. But he reigned a total of 40 years. So you don't go 40 years after after David's death to Solomon's death. He reigned the first 4 years. So if you take 40 and you subtract those 4 years of the co-regency, you add 30 years. I'm sorry, 36 years. So if you take the year of David's death, which was 967 BC, and negative 967, and then you add 36, then you would get to Solomon's death year of 931, which is when the kingdom was divided. And you'll find that when we go through the king's period, there are a number of times where there's co-regencies, and it's much more. This is something that I guess historical Israel and Christians have had a great deal of time with, and it wasn't until Mr. Camping published the book Perfect Harmony. I always get the title wrong. Perfect Harmony, the numbers of the Hebrew kings, or the numbers of but Perfect Harmony. It wasn't until then that we had a good understanding of how to synchronize all those. Oh, I see somebody has it. What's it called? The Perfect Harmony of the Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. Thank you.
Somebody had another question in the chat, Brian. They asked the 111 years that runs concurrent with the 360.
It would have been a part of the 10360. Or sorry, it would be a part of the 360. It would have been concurrent with it. That is correct. But the 111 years wouldn't necessarily be continuous. It's not like the 111 years, like it starts here and then 111 years it ends. It's just spaced over the course of the 360 years. They're not all necessarily together.
Well, it looks like there's no more questions. So I think what we'll do is we're just waiting for Guy to log in, and then we'll begin the Bible reading session. In the meantime, I'm just going to play some music. But yeah, thanks again for joining us, and God willing, we hope to be back next Sunday for another episode.